I watch about one movie.
Oh, higher.
So
Okay.
I don't know if I
It makes me look too fat.
Want some books? We could put some books on it.
Yeah, put a couple books and then bring it back.
Okay. We are live though. Okay, so somebody hand me that book back there. We
need a couple books.
Please just be a tiny bit higher. Thank you.
Can I have a couple more books?
We're still just figuring this out, everybody. Now what do you think? Oops, that got stuck in there.
Yeah.
See what Derrick, what do you think, Derrick? Because we can tilt the screen too.
Yeah, and then we're going to tilt it back down.
What do you
Oh, it's
think?
good. No, that's
perfect?
good. That's
Okay. We did it.
Okay.
All right, I believe we are live. Hi, everybody. Now, do you have, yours is on. This is the floating mic. You already
Okay.
have yours on. Yeah. So we are live from the, we are live from the, I'm going to turn it this way, tiny bit. We are live from the DGR conference. It is July 4th, as you can see from my patriotic shirt. Is it ironic or unironic? Only you can say. This is part of our tradition. We do something every year live from the conference. So this year we are doing the Q&A with Derrick live. So I'm just going to hand it over to you. If you have questions for Derrick, feel free to put them in the chat. We've got somebody looking for those, and we will forward them to the appropriate party. And otherwise, we're going to take questions from the room. So yeah, we're going to start. Also, it's a fundraiser. I always forget that part. So if you feel like giving money to DGR to help us do our work, like fund the conference, you can give us money. Deepgreenresistance.org. There's a donate button on every page. So on that happy note, who has a question?
No, I've got a.
You going to say something?
I'm a start.
Oh, you go for it.
So yesterday I was having a delightful conversation with a very smart young person who is getting a degree in mechanical engineering. And we were discussing, among other things, the fact that he took differential equations. And I got a degree in physics, and I didn't do very well in differential equations, which I learned is a problem for advanced physics. And so I kind of had this fantasy of maybe instead, if I would have gone into mechanical engineering, I wouldn't have had to deal with differential equations. And that fantasy was destroyed yesterday of an alternative life. But the reason I bring all this up is because my first degree was from the Colorado School of Mines, and Lee Ayer often says that I was set up to be one of the architects of the apocalypse. Many of my fellow students ended up being, like one guy, one of the friends of one of my older sisters who went to the School of Mines, he ended up the head chemist for Phillips Petroleum. And a lot of my friends in college ended up being high-level people at various oil companies. And so that could easily have been my path had I not, for whatever reason, gone the direction I've gone for many reasons. Anyway, so that was one story I wanted to tell, and then I wanted to tell you about a dream I had last night. It's like, oh, Lear's going, oh my God, he's starting a fundraiser with telling you about his dream last night. So in the dream, I was on this train that was hurtling through the landscape, and it was going incredibly fast, and it was they had made it so you didn't ever have to stop the train, and the train is moving rapidly through, very, very fast through a devastated landscape. And the part of the genius of the plan was they didn't have to stop to onboard supplies. They could just get the supplies without the train slowing down. And this was the fuel for the train. This was the food for the people on the train. And, you know, sometimes people have said to me that I'm pretty good at dream interpretation, but I don't think you have to be particularly good at dream interpretation to get what this particular dream is about. So it's going through the landscape. They figured out a way to put track as the train is moving. So it never has to slow down at all. It's just going all around the world again and again. It reminds me of this line by this 19th century lumberman where he was saying, you complain that what we do as timbermen is cut and run, but we don't. We're actually on a sustainable rotation because we start in Maine, and then we move to the Midwest, and we move to the Northwest, and we're done with the Northwest, we're just going to go back to Maine. And that's basically what this train is doing as it goes all over the world. And I start in the back, and I start trying to make my way toward the front of the train. And at first, you can move through the cars without any security. And I'm not even exaggerating this dream. This is a dream I had. And then as you get closer and closer to the front of the train, you have to go through more and more security to get to the next car. And eventually, I get to the car where there are the scientists and technicians. And I say to them, look, we have a technical problem here that we can try to solve. Let's try to solve this technical problem. And they say, well, we've got the problem solved. We've solved them. We're able to just, consume the landscape as we go and keep this thing going. And I said, that's not the technical problem I was talking about. I was talking about the technical problem. How do we stop this thing? And a few of them are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then the others are like, it's an interesting technical question. Let's talk about that. And I keep moving forward, and I get to like the front of the train, and at the front of the train are like the people who are determining where it's going to go. And I'm just mentioning this detail. Okay, this detail does not have to do with Trump derangement syndrome. One of the people in the front cabin is RFK Jr. And I think he was there because of his whole thing about regenerative agriculture. I think that's why he was in the dream. I'm not sure about that part yet. Anyway, I say to him, we have to stop this train. And he says in his, the voice, I'm not a good mimic. He says in his voice, I'm not sure we need to stop it. And I say, I'm sure we do. And that was the dream. So it seems pretty clear to me, but if it's not clear to people, I'm happy to explain it. Or we can go with, well, we actually have a technological problem here, which is my mic is not as good as the other
Why is
one.
this mic not working? What does it sound like? Oh, let's try putting it to the side. I think the problem was right under your chin, and it was also covered by your shirt. So it probably wasn't the mic. It was probably just the position. I said put it a little to the side, so that should be better.
Okay. Well, since the mic wasn't very good, so last night I had this dream.
Anybody want to ask a question?
So,
Raise your hands.
any questions? Doesn't have to be about the dream. It can be about anything.
Oh, you're all too shy. Come on.
So you talk about destruction of dams, and there's people who say that the habitat has adjusted to the dam now years later. So can you please speak to that?
So do I have to repeat the questions because of this? That's too bad, because usually when you repeat the question, it gives you time to
Give an answer.
So before I wrote Endgame, I would give talks, and I would oftentimes talk about the need to take out dams and the need to, and for people to do it on their own if states weren't going to do it or if governments weren't going to do it. And there was a guy who disliked me saying that so much that he would come talk to talk. He would be at every talk basically and say, this is the worst thing you could possibly say to anybody. It's a terrible idea. If people take out a dam without knowing what they're doing, they will do great harm to the land below. And one time I was doing a radio call-in show that was out of Olympia, Washington, and several people during that talk had the exact same response. So I started saying, I don't know what to do. Do we take out dams? Do we just let them go? How do we deal with that? Dams cause great destruction when they fail. And anyway, I was doing this call-in show in Olympia, Washington, and several people called in with the same 2-word response, which was Missoula flood. I'm like, huh? And the Missoula flood happened, I don't know, 7,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, long time ago, during the last ice age, I guess 10,000 years ago, somewhere in there. And basically what happened is western Montana, a glacier stopped the rivers in western Montana from flowing through. And at some point, the lake behind it got so big that it lifted the iceberg and the whole dam collapsed. And all of that water rushed down the Columbia River. And I never can remember if it flowed at 100 feet deep and 60 miles an hour or 60 feet deep and 100 miles an hour. It's one of those two. And it carried house-sized boulders all the way down the Columbia. And it scoured out the whole area. And the point is that the Columbia River salmon and sturgeon and everybody else in lamprey survived that. And they're not surviving the dams. They're not surviving everything else. And not only that, but there were, I don't remember, 57 Missoula floods or something. It happened over and over. And there was a lot of them, and the river survived it. So then I thought, okay, this is more complex. I gotta ask people about this. So I started calling fisheries biologists, just cold calling. I've always been, for whatever reason, not had a problem with cold calling people to ask strange questions. So I'd call up and I'd say, hey, so I was just wondering, if somebody took out a dam, would that help or hurt the land, the water, the river below the dam? Hello? Hello? Of course, hang up on me because I'm this crazy person asking about blowing up dams. And so it didn't take me long, like 10 times of that happening, for me to figure out how to ask, which is I would call up and I'd say, okay, it's 100 years from now, and the electrical grid has collapsed, and we all know the dam will fail at some point in the future. So you and your community have just enough explosives to take out the dam. Would it be better for you to take it out, making sure that there are no humans hurt below it? Or would it be better to just wait and let it collapse on its own? And basically everybody was saying, blow it, blow it. And they had some really interesting things to say about dams. And what they said was, and don't get mad at me for this first sentence, there's gonna be a twist. What they said is dams are actually not a big deal. In that, see, don't get mad at me for that. In that, rivers get dammed all the time. There'll be a mudslide, there will be lava flow. They said, I think the Shasta River had a lava flow across it, and it was dammed for 3,000 years or something until the water made its way through, or until it eroded. I don't know how long. I'm making the numbers up. Anyway, the problem is not that rivers get dammed constantly. The problem is that all the rivers are dammed. This is just an individual blockage on an individual river is a routine part of a river's life. But the problem is when they all get these impassable dams. And so all of these dams eventually fail. And what a dam failure is, they said, is just a big flood. And rivers flood all the time. And we misdefine, not mystify, we probably mystify rivers too, but we misdefine rivers. A river is not a channel that flows through one place. Like, I don't know if people have seen those maps of, I love those maps of the Mississippi River where you can see all the different places it flowed. Rivers are supposed to writhe across the landscape like snakes. They are supposed to be here this year, 3 years later, they're over here. And then the mouth of the Smith River used to be not where the mouth of the Smith River is now. Even the mouths change. And I was talking to this one fisheries biologist on a undammed river in the Olympic National Park. And she said every time, she said every time the river floods, it breaks her heart. Because every time the river floods, it kills fish, it kills frogs, it kills trees, it kills deer, it kills beaver, it kills a lot of creatures. But every time the river floods, it makes her really happy because it's new habitat. And that's what a river does. And so she said the problem, not the problem, but what happens, the dynamic of a dam on a river, I'm sorry, the dynamic of a flood is that every time it causes short-term habitat loss and long-term habitat gain. And that's, when she said that, it kind of slapped me in the face because I thought, why do we stay in jobs we don't like? Why do we stay in bad relationships? There's always this fear of short-term habitat loss, long-term habitat gain. why aren't we stopping that train from my dream? It's the short-term habitat loss versus the long-term habitat gain. And so, yes, there will be short-term habitat loss from any dam that fails for any reason. And then there will be long-term habitat gain because the river didn't evolve. Not all rivers evolved with dams on them everywhere. And there's another thing, is that it's great that they took out the dams on the Klamath. I've just last day heard they're going to take out the dams on the Eel. And that's all great when they take out dams. The problem is that there are 60,000 dams over 13 feet tall and 70,000 dams over 6.5 feet tall. That's 2 meters and 4 meters. There are 70,000 dams over, or 70,000 over 6.5 feet tall. And if we only took out one of those dams every day, that would take 200 years. And salmon don't have that time, sturgeon don't have that time, lampreys don't have that time. And anyway, so that is a long answer to a short and smart question. That what will happen is short-term habitat. I mean, it'll mess up the area below, but that's what floods do, and rivers evolved to flood, and that's also another pretty cool thing is that when rivers flood, fish, like I remember a few years ago there was a big hurricane in New England, and they were talking about fish going up into the sewer systems. Fish love floods because it's all this new source of food. They rely on floods because they live in this part of the river, and then it floods. They're immediately heading out into the meadows to eat grubs, eat shrub, eat whatever it is that they can find there, eat creatures who've been killed by the flood. And then, of course, when the flood recedes, they some of them get stuck up there and they end up feeding the meadows. It's this beautiful cycle that is an absolutely necessary part of a river's life. And before we go on, do you, as Mr. Beaver, have anything to add to the discussion of flooding?
We have a mic. You can either hold it or you can clip it to your collar.
I learned something interesting a couple weeks ago. We were producing a little paper on why beaver wetlands are good for trout. And I learned that one of the big natural causes of mortality for trout is the winter ice and ice breakup specifically on systems. So a lot of, like you're speaking to, a lot of animals die in the flood. A lot of fish die in the ice breakup in systems that have a lot of ice on them.
Why?
Because it's this inconsistent movement of a very sharp object in the water. Like
impaled.
Yeah. They're just getting scratched up or totally killed by moving ice, and or pushed up into places where they're basically breached. So one of the things beaver dams do is in systems where you've got freezing bodies of water, they provide kind of a consistent shoreline. So you don't have a fluctuation in the shoreline. And it was just one little detail that I hadn't heard about that was interesting. But that cyclic ice pattern is another version of the scouring flood, not on the scale of Brett's flood or the Missoula floods, but on the annual basis.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Any other questions?
You had a question?
Any
Oh,
questions?
be brave, be brave.
So if nobody else has a question, you ask a question.
Or Mary, is anybody on the, nobody? They're all busy having their barbecue.
Toward the end, but I'll go ahead and ask it now. Can you talk about, Derrick, your one of your future books about food relations, positive food relations?
Oh, sure. So my current schedule for writing is that Leah and I are writing a screenplay, which we will either talk about or not, which is going to be great. And then there's after that I've got 2 books that are done that are ready to go. One is at my agent right now, and that's about taking care of my mom as she died. And I mean, the short version of that is that there's a cliche about it takes a village to raise a child, and I learned the hard way that it takes a village to take care of an elder, and I did it more or less by myself, and it was a disaster. I mean, and also because I can never stay on topic, it ends up being meditations on mortality. And like one of my discussions I really like in there is a discussion I've had since I was a kid with myself about heaven and afterlife. And I remember I was raised a Christian and Adventist, and I remember asking the youth pastors when I was a kid, they always said that humans get to go to heaven, but like non-humans don't. And like dogs? And the problem is, and they said, no, dogs don't get that. It's like, well, then why would I want to go? And the problem is, so I go back to Neil Everenden, and this is, of course, why the book ends up being about everything, because this is how I am. So I remember when I interviewed Neil Everenden in 1992 about his great book, The Natural Alien, one of the questions I asked him was, so if you don't make a distinction between significant humans and insignificant non-humans, where do you draw the line of significance and non-significance? And he said, why do you draw the line at all? And for me, that's when my whole world just blew open. And it's the same here. That it's like, okay, if dogs, if there is an afterlife, and I know all the militant atheists are going, how dare you even raise this? But let's pretend for a moment that there is an afterlife. It's like, so if humans get to go, or if Christians get to go, or the ones who accept Jesus Christ as their personal Savior, if some humans get to go, it's like some people would draw the line. Have you accepted Jesus Christ your personal Savior? Like how many people had it on your bingo card that I was going to talk about that today? Anyway, so if humans get to go, if dogs get to go, why not cats? And if cats, why not bears? And if bears, why not bull snakes? And if bull snakes, why not pine trees? And so I keep taking this, and I eventually ran into a problem with thinking through this, that the problem I ran into was frogs. And not because frogs are like separate than bull snakes. I mean, they're no less significant. But the problem is, what do you do about a frog who emerged as a tadpole and then got eaten 5 seconds later by a dragonfly nymph? Does that count? Does that get afterlife? And then what about an egg that was fertilized but then got saprolegnia, a mold, and never hatched? What about, yeah, sure, a big redwood tree, but what about a redwood tree that was only this big? And then what about bacteria? What about amoebas? It's like, where do you draw the line on the afterlife? And so it's like the whole thing so I do that exploration in there, and I end up as mushy as I did right here, that it's like, I don't know. But I sure know it's not just one group of humans, because humans aren't particularly special. Oh, and then also, I was thinking, what if you have a heaven, but God isn't a humanoid, an anthropocentric God? What if instead, some logger lives this great and wonderful life, and then he gets to heaven, and St. Peter is like a big old Doug fir? Or another one. What if the human is a lobsterman, and he gets to heaven, and St. Peter is there, and St. Peter's a lobster, and he goes, dinner is served. So anyway, so the book ends. The book is not really funny, but so that's one book. And then there's another book that I need to rework that's already done, but I need to rework it. And Leah's going to help me with that. And then the book after that is going to be it's basically about feeding bears, because I've been feeding bears for Well, my mom was feeding bears and I'm feeding bears. And the way I write a book generally is I have a backbone and then I tell stories off of it. And the backbone of cultural make-believe is the history of the KKK. The backbone of A Language Older Than Words is my personal history and then all sorts of stories off of it. The backbone of Endgame are the however many 20 premises, and then I diverge off of that. And the backbone of that story is going to be all the arguments we hear for why you shouldn't feed bears. Like, first off, a fed bear is a dead bear. It ends up that that was never developed by wildlife managers in the first place. That was developed by campground owners. And I can actually understand it for a campground because you're dealing with a whole bunch of humans who are going to be stupid. And, you know, if you feed a bear one time, then somebody else is going to put their arms around it and take a selfie. And also, it's not a stable relationship between a human and a bear. It ends up, there was a study done a couple of years ago in some upper Midwest state, Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota, that bears who are fed in rural areas actually have less unfavorable contacts with humans than those who aren't fed. And next thing is they'll learn to not be afraid of humans. I got a couple of responses to that. First is, how horrible is it that all non-humans are supposed to be afraid of us? It's like, and also they're smart enough. They know the difference between when I go on the porch and if I have somebody visiting who goes on the porch. They know the difference between me. They also know the difference. If I'm holding something in my hand, they know that's different. And also, until now, when I say this, none of my neighbors know anything about this. They don't. I mean, the bears know the difference between my place, which they rip my porch apart, and everybody else's place where they don't go. They're not stupid. So other arguments. One of the things I'm going to do in that book that I'm really excited about is no matter what you do, there are winners and losers. And in the case of the bears here, because there are a lot of bears around, in the immediate area of the porch, there used to be a big patch of thimbleberries. That's completely wiped out because the bears are always walking on it. And so the local thimbleberries are losers. And I was just reading this thing the other day about there's a relationship between mountain lions and foxes, that when mountain lions come in, there are more foxes because mountain lions chase away coyotes, coyotes chase away foxes. So it ends up there's all these complex who wins and who loses. Like, somebody could feed a possum, and possums aren't native here, but I still feed them. But opossums also eat ground-dwelling bird eggs. And there's all these relationships. And another argument people make is they'll get used to humans and then they'll become lazy. And first off, bears eat 20,000 calories a day. I'm not. In the fall, when they go into hyperphagia, brown bears eat, or black bears eat 20,000 calories a day. I'm not providing them 20,000 calories a day. Second, we can make the same argument about humans. It's like, well, if you just give them food, they're going to get lazy, and it will be bad for the gene pool because the lazy ones will reproduce. We can make the same arguments everywhere. And I'm saving the best point for last. But another argument that I make is that any nature who survives this bottleneck is nature who can come back later. So I want to help any wild nature I can. We can have an interesting discussion about non-native species and whether one should feed non-native species. I generally, with the exception of the possums because they're kind of cute, I am one of those people who does make a distinction between native and non-native species, and we can have interesting discussions about that. I would love to. But basically, my attitude is anything we can do to help non-humans. And also, we can make the same argument about, people are going to get mad at me about this, but I don't care, that, if we're living in Nazi Germany, you shouldn't actually feed and shelter Jews because then that'll make them not afraid of Nazis. It's like, we collectively are acting to the world as horrendous oppressors. And basically anything I can do to make any non-humans, I mean, I keep thinking about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and of, are there just a few good people? And basically I want to say to the non-humans, there are a few good humans. And then, but I've left off the best point, I think the most important point for last year, which is that I think the fundamental relationship the fundamental currency of any relationship is food. And that's how we work in courtship. It's how birds work in courtship. That is what we do as an offering of friendship is, somebody new moves into the neighborhood, you offer them food. And also it's very interesting. I don't think that my relationship with the bears is entirely based on food. And it is based on food, but it's not just based on food, because they will come to my house a lot and they will just sit there. I'll throw them out some food and they won't even, a lot of times they won't even eat it. They'll just sit there and just look at me. And I look back at them, and then eventually they will just walk away without having eaten anything. I think sometimes they also just want a friendly place. And I think that this gets to the heart of that. Do they always have to be afraid of us? I want a place, I'm going to tell a couple stories about this. I want a place where they feel safe. The food is secondary. The safety is actually the most important thing. A place where they can rest. I'll tell a couple stories. One of them is, these are both absolutely true stories. This all started 20 some years ago when a mother bear dropped her yearling off at my mom's. And bears get kicked out at a year and a half old. They're born in January or December or somewhere in there. And then they live 1 year with the mom, a year and a half, and then the following June, so 18 months old, they're kicked out. And then the mother comes into heat again, and a new round is started. And it's a really difficult couple weeks or couple months for the babies, because they've been fed for a year and a half and now on their own. It'd be like a kid getting kicked out at 15, 13, something. So a mother bear drops her baby off at my mom's, and my mom had always heard you're never supposed to feed bears. So my mom would go out on the porch and she'd yell at the bear and get out of here, the year and a half old. And the bear accomplished something that I didn't think was possible, which is out-stubborn my mom. Anybody who knew my mom was like, that's pretty extraordinary. And because the bear would just sit there and stare at her. Mom was like, okay, I'll give you an apple. Okay, I'll give you some, until by now they're basically running my life. Anyway, so this bear had a relationship with my mom, and there's some extraordinary things that happened. Like one summer, that bear would walk next to me on the path every day when I walked from my house to my mom's house. It's the most voluntarily. That's the thing. I wrote a book, an anti-zoo book called Thought to Exist in the Wild. And in there, one of the arguments they make for zoos is that we need to have contact with non-humans. And in that book, I argue that, yeah, but the lesson you're teaching kids in a zoo is that the animal is there for you. I went to a zoo before I wrote the book, and there was a button you would push on these displays that then would have a sing-song. All the bears in the zoo, all the animals in the zoo are waiting here just for you. And that's what the zoo is teaching you. On the other hand, if you want to have non-human animals in your life, you have to live such that those non-human animals want to be in your life. And you have to live with the uncertainty. There are bears who have, like there was Snaggletooth from a couple years ago, that he was fine, and then one day his tooth was sticking out. And I looked online and he'd broken his jaw. And he was around for the rest of the summer, but I never saw him again. Did he die? I don't know. I'll never know. Is he fine somewhere else? Don't know. They're wild animals. It's not my choice. It's always their choice. so I forgot what story I was going with that, but my mom started, so it was an honor that this bear of her own choice chose to walk next to me on the path every day. I was frankly kind of scary, but it was every day for one summer. I don't know why she did that summer and never other summers. It was one of the most extraordinary things, maybe the most extraordinary thing in my life, to have a wild animal voluntarily choose to walk next to me every day. Anyway, so that bear was around for a long time, 8-10 years, many generations of her babies, and then she disappeared. She disappeared for about 8 years, and my mom and I had no idea. Is she dead? Is she what? And then my mom gets sick with pancreatic cancer. She's dying. And then a week before she enters terminal delirium, the bear, Mama is what we call that bear, Mama shows up on the porch. And she sat there for that week until my mom went into terminal delirium. And then she never came back. I've never seen her since. So that's one story. Another story is 4 years ago now, I think. I went outside, and late at night, I heard some scratching up in the tree. And once you get to know the sound, you can always tell a black bear climbing a tree up and down somewhere. So it's clear there's a bear up in the tree, whatever. So I leave the light on for a while and I watch. And then eventually a couple babies come down. And they're not a year and a half, they're 6 months. It's in June. So they're about the size of Cocker Spaniels, maybe a tiny bit bigger, about Cocker Spaniel size. And there are these things called babysitting trees where mothers will leave their babies in a tree while they go off and they tell the baby, get up in the tree, don't you dare come down. And then they go off and eat or go off and party. I don't know. They go off and sleep. They do whatever it is they're going to do. Anyway, in this case, either the mother died, or it's also possible that this was like a human mother leaving a baby at the hospital. It's like she might have had babies too young, and she's like, I can't do it. And she knew a safe place to leave them. And that makes me feel incredibly honored that she knew that was. So I basically, I didn't raise them. I'll tell you a fun story about bears. It has nothing to do, I didn't do this. That how babies learn what is appropriate food to eat is a mother will take a bite of something and then she breathes into their face. So she teaches them, this food is edible. And I didn't do that. But I did give them food. And then one more story about the feeding bears. And then I'll go back to I think I've undersold the relationship aspect of food. Another thing I thought was pretty funny was that for several years through this weird situation, this is no longer happening, through this weird situation, I was able to get about 1,000 pounds of meat a week that was going to go to the dump. And so I just threw it out in the forest. And one thing that was very interesting about that was that the forests are starving. These forests here should have salmon in them, and there's not many salmon. And salmon-dependent forests grow only 1/3 as fast when they don't have salmon in them. The way I first read that was that salmon-dependent forests go 3 times faster when there are salmon in them, but that normalizes the wrong half. It should be normal for it to be. So they're actually only growing 1/3 as fast as it should. Anyway, so I'm getting all this food. Oh, and then it's extraordinary. Just in a couple years, there were a lot more salamanders around. And also, there are plenty of swallows in this area, but I never saw swallows over my land specifically. And in just a couple years of doing this, I started seeing all sorts of swallows overhead. And that's because the insects. And so the big story here is I really want to encourage people to just feed anything they can to whatever land they're on. I think that land everywhere is just starving. Water is starving. What we've all seen those figures on, 90% of the land mass of mammals is humans and livestock or whatever the numbers are. The natural world is just being absolutely starved. Anyway, so one of the things that was happening was I would get some salmon and I would throw it out to the bears. I'm thinking, hey, here's a little treat. And the salmon aren't eating it. And at first I'm thinking, oh my God, this is heartbreaking because
I mean, the bears.
the bears.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm throwing salmon out and the bears aren't eating it. The bears are looking at me disgusted. At first I'm thinking, oh, this is heartbreaking because they've lost their tradition. The mothers didn't tell the babies. And then after that, I'm thinking, you arrogant little creeps. It's like, I'm giving you this food. It's like, a parent, it's like this happened to me all the time where, I'm a kid at the table. My mom puts down food and I'm like, I don't want this. And it's like, you little ingrates, you're going to sit at the table until you eat this food. And I'm thinking, you're just snobby bears who won't even eat salmon. What sort of crazy bears are you? And of course, I'm the one who's wrong here because it ends up that I was giving them salmon fillets, and bears don't actually like salmon fillets. From their perspective, I was giving them the crap parts. When they eat salmon, they eat the guts and they eat the heads, but especially the guts, the organs. So they're like, they were probably thinking, this guy is keeping the good stuff and he's giving us the crap. It's like, why are you doing this to us? So what else about, I've said this, but I've been telling you anecdotes instead of the predator-prey relationship. No, food is the central relationship of all of our lives. Oh, one more story about that. I was interviewing, I can't remember her name, but she runs Animals Asia, which is a great organization that gets bears out of bear bile farms and then puts them into sanctuaries. And they do great work. And at one point in the interview with her, she said something about, bears are extremely food motivated. I'm like, yeah, they sure are. And then she said, just like we are. I'm like, yeah, we are. And it's that, Leah has this line that she says about how humans are just flatworms with legs. And I think we forget. I mean, again, food is the fundamental currency of, I don't like the word ecosystem because it's machine language. I like natural communities better. I will say ecosystem because otherwise nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. But food is the currency of any natural community, of any so-called ecosystem. And again, it's also really central to all of our social relationships. Again, think about this, just, we just got done breaking bread together, and that's a fundamental line from Jesus. What is it? Eat this in remembrance of me.
Do this in remembrance.
Yeah, which has to do with eating, and consuming the flesh. I want to tell you one more story about this. Is about Jesus. That I was raised an Adventist, and this is getting the wrong end of the logical stick. When I was a kid, when I was maybe 8 or 9, this is both my brilliance and my stupidity. When I was about 8 or 9, it suddenly occurred to me, wow, it's amazing that the whole world follows the story of Jesus because Jesus died and then he was reborn. And isn't it interesting how the whole world follows that lead? And the thing that's brilliant, I think, is that at 8 or 9, I made the connection between death and rebirth. And the thing I think is really funny is I had it backwards. The story of Jesus follows the story of, it's a metaphor of, or it's a myth of the whole death and rebirth that is everything in life. And so I just recently had a dog, a beloved, it's kind of ridiculous to say beloved dog because they're all beloved, but I had a dog die recently. And that was very sad. And the good news was that he died at home and I didn't have to take him to the vet he died very quickly, a stroke, and was dead in a couple hours. And the reason that was good news is that means I can feed him to the forest. You're not supposed to, if they get euthanized, it poisons the meat. Anyway, so I took him out, and a couple days later, there's just all these vultures circling. And, I was very sad that he died. And then Lier, she looks up at the vultures and said, the feast is beginning. That's just the central relationship of all life. And that was another thing when I was throwing all this meat out. I was throwing 1,000 pounds of meat a week out, so I'm not thinking about every individual animal all the time. But sometimes I would get chicken feet, and sometimes I would get pig feet. And those always kind of broke my heart because I would think, as I threw it out onto the ground, I would think this is probably the first time that this foot ever touched soil. And that part would break my heart. And then the other thing I would often say, people sometimes would ask, did you thank the animals? I didn't. But what I did say to them often as I'm throwing out their food is, now you get to be wild. And I would say that to the, to the steaks, to the bacon, to the everything that I was throwing out is, you had a terrible life and I'm sorry. And now you get to be vultures, you get to be bears, you get to be trees, and your carbon will be in a tree for the next 1,000 years. So that's what that book's going to be about. Once again, everything.
And that makes me think of another question, and Jesse alluded to this yesterday, our smart young man here in the group. Do you think there will be some space in that book about how food has been used to control people's labor in the early years of civilization, or not? Would you have space for that?
I might. I dealt with that most directly in Culture Make Believe, where I talk about how in order to, there was this pro-slavery philosopher and his northern abolitionist buddy had a debate by letter back in the 1830s, and the pro-slavery philosopher said, we would get rid of our slaves immediately if we could arrange land ownership conditions differently, because land ownership conditions pretty much determine whether you own slaves or whether you hire them. And it's very simple. If there's a lot of land and not many people, then people have access to land, which means they have access to food, clothing, and shelter, which means they don't have access to self-sufficiency, which means there's absolutely no reason for them to go to work for you. If, on the other hand, you have people in a city where you have a lot of people, not much land, they have no access to land, which means they have no access to food, clothing, and shelter, which means they have no access to self-sufficiency, which means they have to go to work for you for a pittance. And it's actually economically more viable for the owner to not own them, but to hire them. So I might deal with it some in that, but I've already sort of said my piece on that particular issue, which of course never stops me from doing it again.
Any other questions?
First of all, if you like anything that you're hearing today, please go to our website and support us, support Derrick's work and our message. You can click the link that's pinned in the chat, or you can go to deepgreenresistance.org/donate. And if you want to get more involved, you can join DGR as a member. For just $10 a month, you can be an advocate for the cause. Or for $1 a day, you can become an Earth Day member, because every day is Earth Day. And if you can't do any of that, please at least like and subscribe. We've got a few questions in the chat. Somebody says they really liked Derrick's recent interview with Tom Murphy about overpopulation. They want to know, how do you respond when you're asked about deep ecology or overpopulation and you're accused of being an eco-fascist?
That's the answer.
Yeah, that's part of the answer. Part of the answer is also, oh, this makes me so nostalgic. I long for the good old days when I was only called an eco-fascist and not a transphobe. I long for the good old days when they accused me of just, when they were arguing about that instead of whether men should be in women's locker rooms. So yeah, those are the good old days. But I love the line by, so first off, I would recommend anybody read William Catton's book, Overshoot. It is the best book on population, I think. With apologies to Paul Ehrlich, whom I think was great. But William Catton's Overshoot is a fantastic book just about what carrying capacity is. And he has a line in there about ignorance of ecological reality does not make you immune to its consequences. And it does not make one a fascist of any sort to acknowledge that there are more humans on the planet than the planet can support. And I'm going to go to another friend of mine, Dr. John Osborne, who always says, correct diagnosis is the first step toward proper treatment. And if we can't acknowledge there are too many humans on the planet who are living in too high of a level of consumption, then there's nothing we can do about it. If you don't acknowledge that you have emphysema, you can't propose proper solutions. And it horrifies and appalls me that finally, among most places in the world, human population has started to go down, not through draconian means, but just because women are choosing to have less children. And that is considered a catastrophe by many. That I find mind-boggling. I mean, really, all I've wanted since I was a kid is for there to be fewer humans and more wolves and more elephants. And, you know, that's the thing. If there were 8 billion elephants on the planet and they were overrunning the entire planet, we would not be being accused of being fascists if we recognize that there's too many elephants. It's always kind of cracked me up that just how. Oh, and I also want to say so years ago, it was pretty funny. I mean, having said there are more humans than the planet can support does not mean that I particularly care how many children anybody has, because there are no personal solutions to social problems. And my niece has 5 kids, and it's like that among 8.2 billion, that doesn't matter. If you want to have a lot of kids, that's irrelevant to the larger question. And so I'm not suggesting anybody do anything personally on that. I mean, if I ran for president, I've said this for decades, if I ran for president, part of my platform would be that vasectomies on the house. And my campaign slogan would be a snip in every sack. But again, so I think that I guess to get to the point of it, if somebody calls you an eco-fascist because you say there are more humans than the planet can support, living at unsustainable levels of technology, then that person is not engaging in honest discourse, and that person is simply attempting to get you to shut up. And my response to that is to simply keep talking. And it's, it used to be a standard part of environmentalism that one recognized that human population was part of the problem. And it's very interesting, and we don't really have to get into this, but there was a coup in the 1990s in the Sierra Club among the leadership to oust the population people, in part because among the leadership to oust the population people, in part because it was because a lot of the population people also believed in not open borders, and they believed in limits on immigration. And those became, on the left, just hot button topics. You can't either talk about population or immigration. And if you do, then you're a fascist. And it's actually pretty funny. A joke I used to tell at my talks all the time was that I absolutely believe that you should close the borders to immigration on one condition, which is you also close it to the movement of resources. And everybody in the audience would laugh, but they had no idea that I was actually serious. I think we should close the borders to the mineral resources, because the natural world cannot support infinite demand on any resource, no matter how abundant. And the Columbia River salmon were in big trouble even before the dams were put in because of the canning factories. And no population of anything. Passenger pigeons were the most common bird in North America, and they fed people in cities all over the East Coast. The population could not support that infinite demand. And I really understood that. I knew this anyway, but I really understood this when I was writing Endgame, and somebody wrote me from British Columbia to say that she used to see 3 or 4 grizzly bears every day, and now, this is in the early 2000s, she didn't see any. And the reason is that the hunters had discovered the Chinese bear bile market, and were shooting grizzly bears for their bile. And if something as esoteric as the Chinese market for bear bile can cause a population collapse in British Columbia, it's like nothing can support that. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, an immediate closing of the borders to everything. What I'm saying is we need to relocalize food systems. I think you were talking about this yesterday. And that's the big lesson I learned from COVID. And I don't understand why people in charge didn't learn it, is, forget whether COVID was caused by whether, Fauci did it all by himself, or whether he had Chinese help, or whether, forget all that stuff. I don't care. The point is that within 10 days of Wuhan closing, a Hyundai factory in Korea shut down because they couldn't get parts from Wuhan. And that's fine that a Hyundai factory closes down. In fact, good. But when you're talking about food, it's absolutely insane to have food brought in, even from a national security perspective. It's utterly insane to have food sources be not localized. And I think anybody from Europe who survived, anybody from Germany after the blockades of World War I and World War II should understand that question. Anyway, so relocalizing, don't let them shut you up when they call you fascist. What name can they call them in response? They call us a fascist we can call them a human supremacist. I learned very young in a name-calling debate, or not debate, but in like 4th grade, one of my older sister's boyfriends taught me this. He said, if they call you like different names, keep calling them the same name over and over. Just use the same one, and that'll win the argument every time. That's how 4th graders win arguments. So if they call you a fascist, just say human supremacist. And they call you eco-fascist, human supremacist. I'll say something else about that. Yes, there are more humans than the planet can support. Yes, we are living at unsustainable levels of technology. Acknowledging that we are living at unsustainable levels of technology does not mean that there are not too many of us. Acknowledging that there are too many of us does not mean that you're not acknowledging that we're living at unsustainable levels of technology. It's multiplicative. Both are part of the problem. And we can have a longer discussion another time about how the teaching girls to read is the best long-term solution to population. Oh, I'll say one more story about this, which is when I was a kid, I was very messy, and my mom would say for me to clean my room, and I wouldn't do it. And then she would say for me to clean my room, and I wouldn't do it. And then she would say, if you don't clean your room before dinner, I'm going to clean it up. And if I clean it up, you're not going to like it because I'm going to throw everything out. And that's basically what nature is saying to us, that we have plenty of opportunities to clean up our messes, and we can do it. We can solve overpopulation nicely. We could solve overconsumption nicely. We can do all those things with with less pain than we will otherwise. And if we don't do it, nature's going to do it. And if nature does it, we're not going to like it. I guarantee we're not going to like it. And that's another thing is I am stunned that we have not. I love asking the question, who's in charge? And I think about this, like we've discussed this other times where, parasites will change the behavior of, like if a dog gets rabies, its behavior gets changed such that it's serving the rabies. And there's a liver fluke who one stage of it is to be in an ant, and then has to get eaten by a sheep. So it will change the behavior of the ant to make it crawl to the top of a tip of grass and grasp on so that it hopefully gets eaten by sheep or cow to pass on. So who's in charge? And I sometimes wonder about human behaviors, like who's really in charge? And I think one of the creatures, you could not create a better system. What I'm trying to say is I think that you could make an argument that cities are factory farms for humans. And they're just factory farms for bacteria and for various pathogens on humans. And I am stunned that there have not been more. I am saying this in a value neutral sense, just saying this. People are going to say I'm saying this gleefully. I am not. I know what it's like to be horrendously sick. But I am stunned that there have not been pandemics, much larger pandemics among humans, because I wrote the first major thing, or not the first major thing, but the only thing I ever had in the New York Times Magazine was a short article about loss of honeybees through disease. And one of the things I said in there is we've created perfect conditions for honeybee pandemic by you move 500,000 hives or however many hives into one valley near Modesto on the almonds every year. And then you bring them in, and then you transport them from there. They're there in the winter, and then you move them up to North Dakota. And then other bees are down in Florida for the oranges, and they move up to North Dakota too. So you end up with a huge concentration where disease can go hive to hive, and then you transport them, including transporting the mite or the whatever it is, and then it gets transported to Florida. You've covered the entire country in a year. And humans, it's extraordinary. We're packed in tight, and then you can have somebody in New York City today, and then they fly to San Francisco, and they walk by somebody who just flew in or is just flying out to Hong Kong, and they walk next to somebody who's just flying out to Pretoria. It's like, I understand antibiotics have made a big difference. I understand, but it's extraordinary to me. We collectively have created such conditions for pandemic. I am not sure why that hasn't happened. It's please.
It used to be that cities were actually population sinks, and you would have too many people in the countryside. And there was always this problem, well, you have the one son, but what about the second, third, and fourth son? And you would send them to the city. So they would go one of two places. They would either go into the military where they would get killed, or they would go to the city to try to, make their fortune. And the average age, you only would live 18 months once you got to the city. That was the average length of time until a disease got you. And so it was this constant drain of the population from the countryside into the city that kept the population more or less stable. And what changed all of that, of course, was the Victorian age, the public works of sewers, that they started to understand what diseases were and how they were transmitted. You could see them finally under a microscope. Pasteur did his thing, and everybody started to catch on. So once they cleaned up the sewage problem, then that stopped. So ever since then, I'm glad people aren't dying of typhoid, and I'm glad that the Thames River doesn't stink like a sewer anymore. But that is what stopped that, the cities just being a place essentially where people went to die because of all the diseases that spread. So that's kind of the answer to that. That until very recently, that was true. That in fact we did create just a breeding ground for bacteria, and they were called cities.
So, and I guess my final word on population for now is the same with everything else. I just want to talk. I just want to have honest discussions about it. We can't figure out what to do if we're not going to discuss it openly. I want to discuss, civilization is inherently unsustainable. I want to discuss this population is inherently unsustainable. I want to discuss. So I've seen people say, yeah, 8 billion is unsustainable, so the population needs to be 2 billion. Honestly, what I think is, my understanding is in highly fecund areas, human population of about, the carrying capacity for humans on a fecund area like New England is about 1 person per square mile. And which makes sense because you have a band of 100 people in a 10 by 10 area. That works. So we're not talking 2 billion. And, so here's the thing. Someday, the population will be lower than it is now. Okay, do we all agree with that? I would rather that population went down voluntarily through nice means. And it's like, I was 35, 36 years ago, I was riding in a car with George Draffin and we were stuck in the traffic in Seattle. And I'm just making conversation. I say to George, so George, if you could live at any level of technology that you wanted, what would it be? And George was in a terrible mood. And he said, that's a really stupid question, Derrick. We can fantasize whatever we want, but the only level of technology that's sustainable is a Stone Age. And we will be living again there someday. And the only question is what's left of the world when we get there. And it's the same thing here. We can fantasize about human populations all we want. We will be living at a sustainable level at some point, or we won't be living at all by definition. And the only question really is what's left of the world when we get there. And again, every cell in my body wants for us to have a voluntary transformation where we discuss this stuff openly. I don't understand why it's so controversial to say that there are more humans than the planet can support. I don't understand why that ends up getting you called a fascist. I mean, if you were suggesting actually killing all the extra people, then sure, we can put the word fascist on that. But if you're just saying, look, this is not sustainable, and so here's some yeast saying this, and all the other yeast in the wine vat are going, shut up. I don't know. So what's another question?
There were some requests for or suggestions for people for you to interview. Somebody said,
Oh, Tom Murphy's great, by the way. Do the Math is his blog. Just look up Tom Murphy, Do the Math. He's great. I love talking to him. I was communicating with him last night. We're going to set up another interview about what? We don't know, but something. He said if he's ever going to write a book, we did an interview about this. It hasn't aired yet. He loves debunking the notion that humans are going to travel through space. Oh, he just thinks it's a juvenile fantasy. And he does it he's a physicist. He does this. He does the math on all this stuff. We live in this big gravity well. He takes a tremendous amount. And plus, space really does want to kill you. You can't. He says we don't even live 100 feet under the ocean, and that's a cradle compared to outer space.
somebody really enjoyed your interviews with Katie Singer. Our internet footprint wanted to know if you'd consider doing another interview with her to discuss that topic further, or to discuss other tech like AI. And then somebody suggested that your ideas to some extent overlap with Daniel Suelo, the guy who lives without money. Assigning monetary values to living things is extremely inappropriate. He wishes that you would interview that guy. And he says he's very...
Those are great suggestions. I want to say something about the whole money thing. Is we hear this all the time about how we need to assign value to, quote, ecosystem services, and how if you assign a value to what a river will do for you or for the economy, then you're more likely to save the river. And there are some circumstances in which I think one I don't actually care why the beaver gets saved or why the dam comes out. And one of the reasons they took out the dams on the Klamath is because it was not economically viable to bring them up to current levels of what's the word? Current standards of how a dam is supposed to be. It was going to be too expensive. They took them out. That's fine. I don't care what argument you make, I don't care if you don't make an argument at all, as long as the dam comes out. And it's the same. People can make economic arguments to save beaver, and I'm delighted if that saves beaver, but I don't care about the argument itself. And I was doing a talk or doing a video with, I think it was Yale, and many of the people in the audience were very big on we need to monetize everything. And I was arguing that nature has inherent value, and whether it has economic, it's always pissed me off when you read some article about some endangered species or some species going extinct, and then the journalist would always have to say, yes, and this is going to cost us X number of dollars when that species goes extinct, or we need to save the Amazon because there might be medicines that we can make a lot of money off of. I've always hated those arguments. Again, use the argument to save the Amazon, but it's like, don't pretend that, but it is inherently destructive to use that argument. The point is, they were arguing that we need to put values on everything, and I was arguing against it, and they weren't hearing me at all. And so finally, I got a brainstorm, and I said to one of the students who was being especially vociferous that we need to put economic value on everything, I said, you just convinced me. And in fact, I've been sort of being dishonest with you the whole time, because I agree that we need to put values on all of nature. And I agree that that applies to humans too. And in fact, and they were nodding, and it's like, this is not outrageous. Insurance companies do this all the time. And they've got these actuarial tables where, if you die at a certain age, then the lawsuit will bring a certain amount of money because you're earning value. I said, so I completely agree with you. And in fact, just before we got on this video, I was talking to your parents, and we agreed that since you're at Yale, you're probably going to start at like $100K a year. And so your lifetime earnings are going to be like $4 million, $5 million. And the present value of that $4 million is about $2 million. So here's the thing is, the bad news is I bought the rights to kill you. And the good news is I way overpaid. I paid like $5 million for it. And he didn't get it. And it's like, see, that's the thing, is that it's all great to talk about ecosystem services when we're talking about somebody else's death. But when it's you suddenly, then suddenly it makes a big difference. And so that's why I agree that it's not a good idea to put economic values onto things, because we're talking two completely different value systems. It's like, this is going a little bit away from that, but there was this philosophy professor who had an office next door to mine when I taught at Eastern Washington University. I used to go in sometimes and chat with him, and it would drive me crazy because he insisted that humans assign all value, and because humans assign all value, therefore anything in nature has no value unless we say it does. And I would say, no, blue whales have inherent value. And he would say, no, they only have the value we give to them. And I always wanted to I never did this, I always wanted to take a hammer in, and I wanted to smack him in the head with a hammer and say, not getting hit in the head with a hammer has inherent value. Do you agree with that at last? But I never did that. And that's the story that was true, but the story I always told in all my books, I would threaten to, or not, I'd fantasize about hitting him in the hand. But I actually I didn't threaten to do anything, but I fantasized about hitting him in the head. It's like, because he couldn't get. And it's the same with the economic value. The economic value, we just did a video on this, on the multiple layers of reality. Economic reality is real. It costs money to rent this place. You have to pay money every month for rent or for taxes, or you get kicked out. That's a real, that is one layer of reality, but that is a social layer that is only, that is true. There are physical consequences, but they're only physical consequences because we all agree that there are. There's also physical reality, which is without the plankton, we have no air to breathe. And this is something I've also thought about with postmodern philosophers is you put a bag over their head, a plastic bag over their head and tie it. And it's like air has value. And, I got this argument from Charlene Spretnak, who argues that drinkable quantities of clean water are necessary for life. And you can build your entire morality around the fact that drinkable quantities of clean water are good. And you just build up. So the fact that we are animal beings is the basis of my entire morality. And I'll cut to the chase. I'll do a spoiler on that for me, what that means is that the ultimate measure of your life is whether you leave the physical world a better place because you lived in it. That's the ultimate sign of a good life. Not whether the economic system's better off because you lived in it, but rather physical reality, which could be because you spent a whole lot of money to buy a whole bunch of land to set it aside. So those systems can intertwine, but the real measure is whether there are, more varied thrushes, more beavers, more Pacific lampreys because you lived and died. Any more present day questions? Any more present company questions? Any more online questions?
It is interesting that you talked about economic systems because that's kind of where the chat is going. Somebody's asking, should green movements be communist? Somebody else was asking, is it worthwhile for Greens to join the socialists to form a government? Does the market have a place? What if we move to restoration agriculture? Is there a path to be invented like that? I think you kind of already answered that.
I guess if I had one wish for the Greens, it's that they once again stood for wild nature instead of for fetishes. Because the Green Party has become just a complete disaster. I was actually, what are they called? Not a candidate, but a delegate having to do with the Green Party in like 1990 or 89 or 88 or a long time ago. And I kind of liked them then. And as late as 2007 or something, I was asked by a former presidential candidate for the Green Party to run for California Senate as a Green. And I decided not to because my health couldn't take it. But so the Greens weren't as awful as they are now. And now the Greens are just a party of sexual predators, basically. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They've completely given up on, I mean, it is, I hate to use the right-wing language, but they're clown central.
And what about the communist question?
What about it? What was the question?
Should the Greens
Greens
Should
and
green
commies.
movements be communist? Does the market have a place? What if we move to restoration agriculture?
So
because of course communism is so great for the planet.
Well, it's still
yeah, it's still industrial. Somebody said that here.
Wrecked the place.
You need to stop using the F word when we do live things.
I know, terrible. I don't do it that much in my life. I know. The F-bombs. They
So
need to go to Eastern Europe and look around. Like
it's-
what the Soviet Union did to the land, to everything, to the rivers, to the completely draining the.
well, the problem in all cases is the industrialism, and I really understood this.
Tell them that great story. The guy who said, "Oh no, completely free market."
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. That's great. There was a communist revolution in the 15th century or something. It was in Germany. Thomas Munzer or something like that. I don't remember. Anyway, it didn't work, but they had a problem immediately, which is that no matter what your economic system, you have to funnel resources to the producers. And that's the problem. It doesn't matter whether the timber company is owned by Weyerhaeuser, the horny-handed workers, as the communists would say, or a state timber company,
Or even a worker co-op.
a worker co-op. It doesn't matter because you still are funneling the trees through that collective, whether the collective and the trees don't actually care how that collective is managed.
Well, like the thing I always say is the problem is you've got living communities, you turn them into dead commodities, and then you turn those into private wealth. And that's capitalism. And so what these sort of left-leaning people want to do is they want to take out the part, they want to stop it where it turns into private wealth and turn it into a more collective wealth. But the problem is prior to that, it's taking the living communities and turning them into commodities. I don't actually care at the end of the day who's getting all the money for it.
And the trees don't either.
Yeah, I mean, the point is you're killing the planet either way. Whether you're making everybody a little bit wealthy or a few people very wealthy, you're still killing the planet. That's the issue. So I always make this joke that I'm to the left of Karl Marx, but it's not a joke. I really mean it. Like, that's the prior problem. It's not how we're distributing, the dead commodities. It's that we're turning the planet into dead commodities.
And and what Mumford would probably say about this is that the problem is the machine itself. And it's being fed in the machine no matter whether the managers are, we all know that capitalism is based on subsidies. And so Chomsky would, and I might be misunderstanding his argument, but my understanding of part of his argument was that we have state-sponsored capitalism here, we have state-sponsored capitalism in the Soviet Union, and in both cases, they're subsidizing the things that they want to subsidize, and in all these cases, it's serving the machine itself. What Mumford would call the machine is this larger. One of his brilliant things was to talk about this thing called the mega machine, which is a machine composed of human beings, a machine composed of disposable parts, and that's a social organization, top-down military-style bureaucratic organization. And it was what built the pyramids. It's what Napoleon had for his army. It's what the United States has for its army. It sells Coca-Cola. It doesn't matter what your machine is doing. It's that same organization, which is a remarkably efficient way. How do you there's this thing called Dunbar's number, which is like 120 people. And you can't have direct democracy at numbers larger than that. In smaller than that, you can have the relationships. Everybody's relating to everybody. You can have more informal forms of government. Once you get beyond that, you have to have a larger form. And also, I have always thought that humans are fundamentally contentious. And we pick at each other, and we end up disliking each other, and I'm going to be mad at you, and then you're mad at me, and then we both go and gossip to you, and then you complain to you about us gossiping to you. And I think songbirds are the same. I know bats are the same because I've read this study where they audio and video recorded bats who are hibernating through the winter or hanging out in the cave and figuring out their language from what they do. And most of the time, they're basically complaining at each other. It's like, you're too close, move over there. No, you're too far away, come back. And I think that humans being that way has an evolutionary purpose, which is evolution understood that in small numbers, 120 people, we can be apex predators and not cause too many problems. The problems come when there's 100,000 of us in one army marching across a landscape, and we're like army ants, except on too big of a scale. So I think that us being fun, and the point is that Mumford's mega machine was a way to get around that human contentiousness and to make a supra-human organizational schema that makes it so you can have 1 million people building, or 100,000 people, or 10,000, however many people building, didn't have 1 million people, however many people building a pyramid, which, by the way, was a tomb, which Mumford makes that great point, that the first thing the mega machine did was build a gigantic tomb, which is what we're doing as before, so after. Yeah, I don't think that I think the social organization is, the fact that you're converting the living to the dead is the problem. And the fact that we value the dead, the fact that living schools of fish don't have that they gain value when they get turned into fish sticks is part of the problem.
And now tell that story about the guy.
Oh, yeah. So I was getting interviewed one time by Nature Sick magazine. I've gotten interviewed by them 3 times, and they've been 3 of the most anti-nature interviews ever. Nature Online specifically. Anyway, this guy was a dedicated communist who thought that you could have an industrial society with all purely voluntary exchanges, that you didn't have to have any coercion whatsoever. And you just pay people more to do the things you don't want, nobody wants to do. And I said, great, do you have cities? And he thought you could have an industrial communist society with purely voluntary exchanges. I said, great, do you have cities? He said, yes. I said, great, how do you get around your cities? He said, in buses. I said, great, what are your buses made of? He said, metal. I said, great, where do you get the metal? He said, from a mine. I said, great, how do you get people to work in the mine? So you pay them a whole bunch. I said, well, we know that mining is one of the worst forms of living on the planet, and that it's one of the first forms of slavery. Nobody wants to go in a mine, but I'm going to grant you that one. Yes, you can pay people a whole bunch to spend their lives and die early of, some horrible disease. Great. But what do you do about the fact that every single hard rock mine on the planet pollutes groundwater? Every single one. He said, well, what's the point? I said, well, it pollutes the river that's right next to the mine. What do you do about that? What do you do about and he didn't care about the fish. I said, what do you do about the people who live by that river? He said, you tell them to move. I said, what if they don't want to move? He said, well, you pay them a lot to move. You just pay them a bunch. I said, what are you going to do if their ancestors are buried there and they've lived there for 5,000 years and they won't move because their entire religion is based on worshiping that land? He said, how many of them are there? I said, I don't know, 500? He said, well, the people in the city vote, and they vote that those people at the river have to move. And then you force them out. And I said, so you've moved from purely voluntary exchanges to democratic empire, land theft from indigenous people, and possibly genocide, all within less than a minute, and also you can have a bus. And so that's the problem right there. The problem is these technologies require certain social forms. No matter where you put in a mine, it is in somebody's home, especially when you include non-humans. And then when I used to teach at Eastern Washington University, at one point, there was a guy in my class who was he used to own a mill, and he'd been driven out of business by Weyerhaeuser. And he hated Weyerhaeuser more than I did, but he was very pro-logging. And at first, he and I were looking at each other like, sort of strange dogs, kind of snarling and walking around each other. But then we had some nice conversations. And we were like, okay, so what are some regulations that you could live with? And what he and I both agreed is that absentee land ownership should be gotten rid of. And that especially, he said, nobody should be allowed to clear cut more than, I don't remember the numbers, a half mile from your home. So nobody should be allowed to live in Seattle and clear cut Eastern Washington. If somebody's stupid enough to clear cut their home, I don't really agree with that, but that's a fight. That's a fight we can put off until tomorrow, because today we're going to agree that nobody should be allowed to live in Canada and deforest Brazil. Nobody should be allowed to live in New York City and deforest Canada, or put in mines or anything else. Nobody should be allowed. If you're going to wreck, like there's this guy, he's dead now, Barry Rosenberg, was this great activist. And he was an activist basically because of one of the most expensive clear cuts the Forest Service ever did in terms of their own stupidity, because he was a back to the lander, and he was one of those guys, just leave me alone. I want to live here with my own, stream water, off grid, everything. And the Forest Service clear cut right behind his house and wrecked his water supply. And he dedicated the last 35 years of his life to stopping every timber sale he could. It's just, they didn't leave him alone. They should have never clear cut and destroyed his water supply. Nobody wants their water supply destroyed. Nobody wants their water supply. Nobody wants fracking where you are getting your water. Nobody wants a mine where you get your water.
So station break. This is
Sure.
Deep Green Resistance, and this is our conference. You are listening to Derrick Jensen speaking right now live. And if you enjoy what he's saying, if you think it's important, if you think it's a voice that the whole world should hear, you can give us money, and that will help make that happen. So I hate asking people for money, but we got to do it. So deepgreenresistance.org, there's a donate button on every page. We would love to see even little tiny donations help us get our work done. So yay for that. And now back to Derrick. Here you go.
Could you speak to what a vision of a small scale, sustainable human group would look like? Would it be fully nomadic again? Would it be permaculture? Do you have a vision of what that would look like?
I think it's a great question, and I'm going to answer it seriously in a second, and I'm going to answer it sarcastically first. And don't take the sarcasm personally, because it's not aimed at you at all. I mean, I ask this too, but in some ways, asking that question is like asking when there is a serial killer who is currently in your house killing everybody in your family, saying, how are we going to organize the family tomorrow? It's like, we need to stop the current situation. So there's that. But I think it's a hugely important question too, because we have to know that there is a way to live. And I asked an assistant deputy or assistant deputy chief or whatever the bureaucratic title is for the Forest Service. He was in Spokane back in 1990 or so. And I asked him, so if it ends up that industrial forestry is not compatible with the life of the forest, what then? And his response was, what do you want us to do? Live in mud huts? And actually, yeah. The point is, I want for us, like I said earlier, I like hot showers, but that doesn't alter the fact that the industrial production of hot showers is not sustainable. And there are high-tech meds that are keeping me alive, and they're not sustainable. And this technology that we're using right here is not sustainable. And what I want us to do is to start by talking about what is. And now to your question, humans did live sustainably for most of our existence. And whether we have to be nomadic, I think depends on the place. And the population of the Great Plains prior to the introduction of the horse, I'm going to get the number of zeros wrong, but it was basically 0.00001 person per square mile. There were very few humans on the Great Plains. I guess those who did probably lived along the Missouri, or buffalo without jumps were a pretty hard prey to kill. And in other places like here the population was actually pretty high. I'm going to make up a number. I think the population of this county now is like 35,000. I think it was like 10,000, 5 to 10,000, because there were so many salmon, and they ate 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 salmon, and then they would eat salmon at certain times of the year, and sea mammals and elk. I mean, this place here was a paradise, and so the population was actually.
I mean, it depends whether your protein comes to you, whether you go to it. So in these kinds of places where, it's riverbanks near oceans, estuaries, there's so much food, you don't have to go anywhere. You can just dip a bucket in the water and a net, and you've got
That's literally true.
just for days. Even as kids in this area, I had this woman cut my hair. She's about my age, and she lives down in Arcata. And even when she was 10, 11, 12 years old, she would be allowed to just roam the forest all summer with her friends. And she was white, but all her friends were some of the local indigenous kids. And her mom would send her out with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the kids laughed at her because they knew how to get lunch. And they thought it was absurd that anybody would need to be sent food from home because they knew how to hunt, skin, roast anything that they found either on the beach or in the woods. So they'd eat rabbit or squirrel or just catch crab or whatever, catch some fish. This wasn't that long ago. I mean, this was in my lifetime. She's my age. This was in the 70s. You could just go out and get food. But you didn't have to go anywhere. It's so dense along these kinds of riverways and estuary areas and ocean sides that you could just have a little settled village and you wouldn't have to. In other places, it's different. You're going to have to migrate around and sort of follow the animals. But,
Even the Tolowa would have
one.
Even the Tolowa here had summer and winter, but they would be down at the ocean part of the year, and then they would move up the canyon for part of the year. I don't know why. I don't know what. I have no idea why. I just know that I've heard stories about them having camps with 20-mile walk in between or something. And also, we were just talking about this earlier today about how, all the places you were saying where the protein comes to you were mentioning places that are by water, but insects were a good way to keep humans from overpopulating in a lot of those areas because there's such a pain. I was telling him a story about how I went to Northwest Territories back in 1989 or 90, and I was going to camp and have this glorious time, and I didn't get out of the car because the mosquitoes were just completely nuts. They were literally tapping on the windows at night. It's like a horror movie, and there's maybe way more detail than you need, but I had to pee one night and I got out. The only thing that's not covered is where I'm peeing. I got bit many times in the time it took me to pee. It was just horrible. I stopped at a campground. I was usually just, like I said, staying in the car, but I stopped at an actual good, honest to goodness campground. The campground guy wore a beekeeping suit because of the mosquitoes. And so actually insects have been a good way to keep humans out of these and others or other herbivores. I mean, not other herbivores, but herbivores, keep them out too. Large mammals out. Mosquitoes and biting black flies drive caribou just like wolves do. Anyway, so no, I think that the way humans lived forever was in small groups of, and I'm not the only person. I mean, there's been so many people. Name some of the people who've written about this. Morris Berman, certainly. Who are some other people who've written about humans living in small groups forever? Richard Manning.
Sure. What's her name? The Margaret Mead's Ruth
Benedict.
Ruth Benedict, yeah. I mean, there's so much anthropology on that one.
Yeah. And do your line about worshiping the megafauna and the mega females.
Oh, I already did that this morning.
Oh, we'll do it again for this.
I mean, the first art we ever made, you see like 90% of it is enormous mammals. It's the megafauna. So you'll see like the cave paintings, Let's Go or whatever, and it's all just the huge animals that humans were hunting. And there's pictures of us hunting them. So we're not leaving anything to the imagination. And it's the very first art we made, and some of it is really beautiful. And it's more than just the first art that is actually like telling a story is art of hunting, because it's not just a static representation of an animal that one might see. It's actually a picture of humans doing it. And there's all kinds of things going on, and we don't know what they mean. Were they religious? What were they? Because often the humans are, they're half animal, half human. They'll be half bird, half something else. It's like there's something about we are animals and yet we're human, but we're animals. Like we're moving in and out of this consciousness that they are us and we are them, and also we're different, but we're also them. Like it always just comes back to that. And even if it's a smaller animal, the animal in the picture will be enormous compared to the little tiny humans. So it's clear that that's what's huge in the human consciousness, is the fact that they're keeping us alive, that we need them in this enormous way. And then the second most common art project is, of course, the mega females, these giant female bodies that are usually pregnant. And so it's all there. I mean, you've got the mystery and the birth and the regeneration. And this to me is just the beginning of religion. But they'll even say in the museums, like, male figures are rare. Like, they're there. I mean, there's some famous ones, but it's almost overwhelmingly you get the megafauna and the mega females. So I think that's the center, and it's the mother-child unit is the central unit. And I think if we're talking about a sustainable culture in the future, we have to remember that is our template, is that we are primates and that we are for so long we are dependent, and it really does take that tribe. And it's going to be, we're either going to put that mother-child unit at the center again, like all the other social mammals do. And not even just the mammals. I mean, it's bees. I mean, there's insects that do it as well, where everything is about the nurses taking care of the babies, the larvae. We're either going to remember that, or I just think it's over for us. Because that has to be what everybody cares about, is just protecting them at the center of it. And all the other relationships are secondary to that. So, the brother-sister relationship would be second to that. And then sort of the grandparents, grandchild. But the kind of romantic relationships that we're supposed to all build our lives around now, that's a much later kind of emphasis. I'm not saying, of course, people had lovers and they might have gotten married, but that wasn't the center of the society. The center of the culture was the mother baby. They were a unit, and that had to be protected. So
people ask me sometimes, what do I want to replace this system with? And I always say, I don't want to replace this system with anything. I want to replace it with 10,000 things, each one emerging from its own land base. This is why I don't believe in a universal religion either, because a religion has three purposes or more that I can think of. One of them is to teach people how to get along with each other. Another purpose of a religion is to teach you how to live on the land. And another purpose of religion is to teach you how to experience the divine, which we can also call the mystery. I think humans, I hate the language hardwired, but I think we are hardwired for religion. And the reason I think that is because nature is more complex than we're capable of thinking. And there is, therefore, by definition, a mystery. There is stuff we cannot understand. And I think that there are patterns on the wall. Yeah, you can see there are spackle patterns on the wall, and we can look for patterns in those. We look for patterns in places. And sometimes those patterns are real. Like, if you're walking through a forest and you see a patch of gray that looks a little bit different, it may be a coyote. I was unfaithful to my Colorado heritage. Coyote. It's an interesting linguistic thing. I grew up saying coyote, and the vet also says coyote, but he's from California. There are basically two places in the country that say coyote instead of coyote universally, which is parts of Colorado and parts of northern New Mexico. So coyote.
And some little chunk of California.
Yeah.
As it turns out.
Yeah. Anyway, so some patterns are real. You look through the forest and then you see a different patch, and it's. Anyway, the point is that I don't believe in a universal religion, because anything that teaches you how to live on land, in a religion that would teach you how to live on the land in Arizona would be different than a religion that would teach you how to live on the land here, because you have a different relationship to water and a different relationship to the divine, because the divine manifests, and all those mysteries manifest in different ways in the different places. So what I want to replace this would be 10,000 different ways. One emerging right here, one emerging over in Grants Pass, which is going to be different than here. One emerging in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is going to be different than here. And they can have certain commonalities, but I think, and I remember asking both Linda Hogan and Jeanette Armstrong, who are both Indigenous, I asked them, like, when does somebody become not Indigenous or become Indigenous? And I asked them in sort of different contexts, and their answers were really interesting and different. That Linda Hogan's like, yeah, what do you say about somebody who's like full-blooded Indigenous? They have the ancestry, but they grew up in Los Angeles, and their stories come from Los Angeles. It's like, because really what it's about is about your stories. And then on the other hand, Jeanette said, what about the hill people of the Appalachians? Like the people who've actually lived there for 300 years now, and they can read the way the wind blows. They can read literally the way the wind blows. They can read the signs. And so it's not some magical, genetic thing. It's the stories that we've learned, and those stories have to come from the land over, I believe, over generations. And I was going to say one more thing. Just a story about hunting that I love this story that this guy who taught me how to hunt, he was just a first generation hunter himself, but he was great. One day, and he would take me out, and I was a terrible hunter. My joke is the only thing I ever got was lost. I would wander around, and he's like, he knows his stuff. And one day we're driving back from a hunt, and he's driving, and I'm in the passenger seat, and I don't notice anything really. And suddenly he stops the car and says, "I hate it when they do that." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Somebody poached a doe." I'm like, have I told you the story? Yeah. So I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what he saw. And we get out of the car, we walk over, and there's deep grass, and then there's a dead doe. And the way he had seen that the way he knew there was a dead doe, which had been poached, was that he saw a crow who was standing on the head of the deer. He didn't see the head of the deer, but he saw a crow standing too high in the grass. So he knew that because it's a crow, it's going to be eating some meat. And then he deduced from all that, it's like Poirot or something. I couldn't believe it. And that's just what I think that's what becoming native to a place is just knowing how to read. We could look at a person, I look at Arabic and it's just scribbles on a page. I read, Lord Jim, and it's a very moving story. Why? Because I can read those signs. And I think that reading nature is the same way, but we're just not taught. And we don't, I did track somebody through the forest where I live once, and he was not supposed to be there, a human. But the only way I could track him, it was on thick sand, and he had a distinctive star on the heel of his boot. It's like, so I was as good a tracker as like a 4-year-old. But I was very proud of myself. And I could see that he's walking this direction. I was like, if I followed the direction his feet are going, and then when I got close enough, I smelled smoke, and he was sitting in the forest smoking a cigarette. Anyway, so I was very proud of myself that I tracked him for like 50 feet. Anyway, so that I think is what we have to learn. That's part of the problem too, is that I've said before that one of my realizations that horrified me was that when I realized I touched plastic more than I touched flesh. And John Livingston talks about how often, how many of the perceptions that you have are created by or mediated by humans or machines. And it's almost all of them, as opposed to how many we evolved as beings hearing the non-humans. I mean, I could probably, reel off 50 advertising jingles and God knows how many songs from the 1970s. Can't you see what that woman's been doing to me? It's just, those of us from the 70s know those songs. It's just a spring clean for the May Queen. If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. I got that backwards. It's just a spring clean. Anyway, but on the other hand, how many bird songs do I know? Like 3. I still have trouble telling the difference between Sitka spruce and Doug fir, which is kind of pathetic. I lived in the forest where I lived for 20 years, saying it's a Doug fir, western red cedar, redwood forest before a friend of mine pointed out like a third of these trees are Sitka spruce. Like, okay. And it's just, we're so remarkably ignorant. And it's not, I'm not blaming anybody for this. I'm saying this, I'm doing that thing where you point one finger at somebody else and all the other fingers back at you. And we don't know. We don't know the patterns where we live. We don't know any of that. So I think that that's how we'll live too. And it'll be of necessity. And the same thing is true on other scales too. I know I'm getting way off base here, but I think that humans are supposed to sing together. I think that that's one of the fundamental things that we have done forever. And now, who wants to go to your neighbor's house and listen to them play crappy piano when you can hear experts do it? You can listen to the CD over and over, and it's perfect. I think that that's anyway. So I think how we will be living is in small groups because that's the only thing that's sustainable. I don't think we'll be doing Mad Max. And the reason I don't think we'll be doing Mad Max is because gasoline decays pretty quickly. I think once the system falls apart, there might be a Mad Max thing. Oh, I got to say the bad news though. I think that there will be a return of slavery. Well, there's not a return because slavery is already here. Slavery still exists. There's more slaves in the world today than came across in the Middle Passage. Slavery is still greatly extant in many parts of the world.
Yeah, it's worse than it's ever been.
It's worse than it's ever been in many places. And one of the big reasons, and I'm going to turn this over to you for a second, one of the big reasons that we collectively don't have the numbers of slaves we did a little while ago is fossil fuel. And say the thing about the serfs.
Yeah, I mean, I went over this morning, but 1800 is usually the beginning of the fossil fuel age, and at that point, 3/4 of the humans alive on the planet were living in some form of indenture serfdom or out-and-out slavery, and that all changed because people worked really hard to change it, but also because fossil fuel came along and made that very unnecessary. We could do the backbreaking labor just using petroleum or coal. So the problem is we're on the downside of the curve, and we've got some very nasty surprises up ahead.
That's one of the reasons that I think having conversations like all of this are so important, is because the time to put in place barriers to subsequent enslavement is now. The time to think about how we're going to manage this collapse is now, and we're not talking about that at all. I think, and I want to say again, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. I think Trump is just another president, and I don't particularly like him. But anyway, the point is that his "Make America Great Again" slogan is such a perfect post-peak oil slogan. It just manifests exactly what don't get me wrong, the left goes crazy in its own ways, but that's the way the right is going to go crazy and has gone crazy, is as peak oil has progressed, as the age of exuberance has started to wind down, there are a significant portion of people who are going to attempt to hold on to that to the very, very end and attempt to continue with economic growth to the very, very end. And the longer we do that, the worse things will be. I mean, all of my work can be summed up: this way of living won't last, and when it's over, I'd rather there's more of the world left rather than less. That's it. That's the entire thing. And I want to have these conversations because how do we try to make sure there's as much work? And I'm very biocentric. I care honestly more for wild nature than I do for humans, and for the well-being of wild nature than I do humans. But it doesn't really matter, because it doesn't matter in the long run. Anthropocentrism and biocentrism are the same thing, because if you want a healthy planet, the people 100 years from now, what they're going to care about is whether they can drink the water, whether the land will support them, and whether you protected all the wild nature for wild nature's sake, or so somebody can eat it in 100 years, is irrelevant to right now. Right now, we're protecting it because it needs to be protected. And what's it going to look like in the future, the distant future? Who was it? Was it Eric Fromm who said, when I look at history, I'm pessimistic. When I look at prehistory, I'm optimistic. We did live okay for a long time, and that's possible. But also another thing, it's not going to happen. I did a talk at Bioneers 20 years ago, and their theme that year was "The shift is hitting the fan." Obviously, the shift has not hit the fan. And transitions don't happen that fast. That one of the things that Peggy Reeves Sanday talks about in her book on male or female power and male dominance, which is about markers of high and low rate cultures, really. And she gives one of the markers, there's a bunch of markers for high rate cultures like male creator deity or highly militarized. And one of them was really interesting, which is a history of ecological dislocation in the last couple hundred years. And we can talk about that if you want, but the point I'm making that right now is it takes many, many generations to metabolize trauma, to metabolize ecological. I mean, I think that the effects of World War I and World War II are still ramifying through people's psyches. And I think that that's going on with ecological collapse and will go on. It will take a long time. This is the point that Jeanette Armstrong was making about the people, the hill people, is that it takes a long time to get used to a place, and it takes a long time. And I don't think that when humans move into a place that we're magically attuned, I think we mess up. And that the advantage 5,000 years ago was when we move into a place, we would mess up more slowly. And you could have generations of people going, you know, I think we're killing too many giant beavers or whatever. I don't know if giant beavers went extinct because of humans or not, but let's pretend they did. We had people that are having the same conversation. It's like, there are fewer than there used to be, and others going, nah, you're being a fascist. You're being a fascist for saying we can't kill as many as we want. Except they did it over generations and could learn from, and we're going so fast now that, I mean, there's no insects now when there were when I was a kid. I mean, it's happening so quickly. Anyway, long answer that didn't answer your question at all. But I think that the way we'll be living, if we live at all, I think it's quite possible that humans could wipe out everything. But if we live at all, we will be in small bands because that's the only thing that's ever been sustainable. And whether we will be mobile or not is going to, like Lear said, depend entirely on the place. I don't know whether there's still mosquitoes to drive us around.
Okay, one more question, then we're going to let Derrick rest up. Who's got a final question?
Somebody asked, is it important to try to work with ideological vegans, and if so, how?
I think I am as far from a purist. I'm almost as far from a purist in terms of working with people as you can be. I think that it doesn't matter as long as you're protecting wild nature. And many vegans want to protect wild nature, and that's great. And the first hunters I encountered wanted to protect wild nature, and I had this positive view of hunters for quite a while until I met other hunters. And hunters are a mixed bag. Some of them want to protect wild nature, and some of them are, I would say, something else, except that we want to not do this for YouTube. So they're pieces of poop. And I'll tell a story about that, and then we'll come back to the real issue. I had a publicist set up some radio shows for me one time, and she set up a radio show one time that was with the Pittsburgh Pirates post-game show. I have no idea how that happened. That it's just so I don't even know. Like when I call up the number for the radio station, I'm expecting we're to talk about environmental stuff, and it's like, hey, we got Derrick Jensen on the Pittsburgh Pirates post-game show today. Derrick, what do you think of the game? It's like, I didn't watch the game. I didn't know this. But we're both pros, and we know we have 15 minutes to fill, so we're quickly scrambling. And what we come up with is like, oh, you're an environmentalist, and I'm like, and I know he's in Western Pennsylvania, so it's like there's a lot of hunters in Western Pennsylvania. So it's like, yeah, I think environmentalists and animal rights activists and hunters should all work together to protect habitat. And then once the habitat's there, the animal rights activists can go try to sabotage the hunts. He's like, yeah, that's great. That's great. We want more habitat, and everybody wants more habitat. The vegans want more habitat, but the vegans don't want hunting. So yes, they go out there and they can blow their horns and try to, like, great. So all I care about is that somebody's biocentric, and all I care about is the land gets protected. And if I don't care. Name somebody who's ideologically awful, but don't name Elon Musk because everybody always says Elon Musk. Say somebody else who's ideological. Bezos runs Amazon. If he wanted to give $10 million to protect land,
Go for it.
go for it. Like, great. I don't care. Why would I tell him not to? And if John Baskin,
Oh yeah,
John Robbins, if John Robbins, he was a vegan,
Yeah.
and if he wanted to give money to protect land, great. I would. Oh, we were in our neighborhood. This was before you moved there. We were trying to protect land from being developed, and so we got a neighborhood group, most of whom were just they didn't want extra traffic in the neighborhood. And at one point, one of the neighbors said, "So Derrick, you're just opposed to this development, right? You're not opposed to like all development everywhere, are you?" And I just lied. Like, yeah, well, I don't think I lied. I think I did like one of those Nero Wolfe things where I came as close to lying as I could without. I was like, I think that this is an especially bad one that we need to oppose. But I wasn't going to go anti-civ on her. I'll tell one more story about this. I think it's just great, which is I was getting firewood back in the hills from a slash pile in the National Forest in northeastern Washington. And my pickup's full, and I get a flat tire. And I haven't checked my spare in years, and the spare is flat too. And it's like, oh man, what am I going to do? I'm not going to walk, so I'm thumping along like 1 mile an hour. And I come to a house, and I asked the guy if he's got a pump so I can pump up my spare. And he says, I don't have a pump, but I got a spare tire. I'll just give you a spare tire. I said, great, thanks. So I get the spare tire. I drive home. I get both tires fixed the next day. And then my mom makes a cake. And then I drive up, take him back his tire, and I take him a cake. And he says, oh, thanks. You want to have a piece of cake? We come inside and have a piece of cake. And I notice he's got like chainsaws all over his wall. It's like clearly a logger. And then he says to me, so Derrick, would you like some firewood? I got plenty out and back. I say, sure, that'd be great. And he goes out there holding his firewood holding his chainsaw to cut it into lengths to get in my pickup. And then when we're out there, he says, so what do you do for a living? I say, I'm a writer. He says, what do you write? I'm thinking, oh man. Science fiction, fantasy, romance. But I'm a terrible liar, so I tell him the truth, which is I was writing Railroads and Clear Cuts. I said, right now I'm writing a book about how the big four timber companies in the Pacific Northwest got their land illegally from the public domain. He's holding a chainsaw. He turns red in the face. He starts swearing. And I'm looking for a break in the fence. And suddenly I realize he's an independent law group and put out of business by Plum Creek. He hates Plum Creek even worse than I do, which I didn't think was possible. He knows more about Plum Creek than I do, which I didn't think was possible. And about another 30 seconds, and we got our arms around each other's shoulders, swapping stories of how much we hate Plum Creek. And then I say to him, and then we agree that we're going to spend the rest of our lives, we're going to take down Plum Creek, which of course didn't happen. Anyway, we're going to take down Plum Creek. And then I say to him, you know, I'm against all industrial logging, not just Plum Creek. So once we get Plum Creek out of the way, I'm coming after you. And then he and I both just laugh because we know that it's going to take our lifetimes to do Plum Creek. So we have a theoretical difference. You know, my issue is not with an individual. And so I will work with a vegan, I will work with a logger, I will work with a right winger, a left winger. I'll work with just about anybody as long as they want to protect wild nature. And then we're going to fight on other issues. It's like, I've never understood like why, like there are some fights in the whole trans issue. You know, there's some purity that you can't work with people who are anti-abortion. It's like, why can't we work on this one issue and then not work on the other? And then we'll oppose each other on the other. And we'll just be clear that I'm agreeing with you on this issue and I'm disagreeing with you on this issue. And I will be on the opposite side of the street on this issue. And I'll be holding a sign that says, I disagree with you on that issue. And I'll say, hold a sign that says, I agree with you on this issue. What's the big deal? I've never understood why it's a big deal. Why we can't just agree on some issues and not on others. It's not just because, I don't know. So yeah, I would certainly, I mean, I've worked with a lot of vegans. Also, vegans do a lot of really good work on rescuing animals. A place I end up disagreeing with some vegans is whether deer should be removed from certain areas. There was this guy, he's dead now, a friend of mine from Binghamton, New York, who really cared about salamanders and also ground-dwelling birds. There was a forest reserve that was owned by the university, and he was always complaining bitterly to me that there were too many deer and they were wiping out the undergrowth. And the real solution is to bring back wolves and to bring back the other predators. But in the meantime, he always wanted to bring in hunters. He said the animal rights activists would fight him tooth and nail. And he said, yeah, these animal rights activists are saving deer, but they're killing salamanders and birds. And it's always, I mean, there's always somebody going to lose. I know mountain goats were introduced to the Olympic Peninsula, and they wanted to take those out. And animal rights people have been fighting against that. And that's a whole other issue of native species. I mean, it's not the individual fox's fault that fox has been put on the Aleutian Islands, but that doesn't alter the fact that it's killing the Aleutian geese, and it was killing the Aleutian geese and needed to be removed. I mean, so there's a thing I haven't really said that I think is really important too, is my loyalty is always to the native community. And by which I mean, yeah, I love the individual bears, but what's really important is the functioning of the whole community. And I'm convinced, I love the Paul Stamets line that nature loves a community. I think nature does not particularly care about me, and especially once I passed reproductive age. I have learned that it doesn't care if your bones start falling apart, and if, but it does care about the larger community. It wants a larger community. I mean, nature's pretty scary. 1% of tadpoles make it to froghood. And I have seen so many tadpoles getting eaten by dragonfly nymphs. And that's the beauty and horror of life. That's what comes with sexual reproduction.
On that happy note, we should let Derrick go. Thanks everybody for participating. And don't forget, if you want to donate, deepgreenresistance.org, and like and share
And subscribe.
and all that stuff. Hit that little button and that bell.
Thank you for the great questions.
Great. There we go. Okay, we're off.